Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a special live edition of the Breakthrough Show. I'm your host, Jessica Dugas, a homeschool mother of 6 and passionate advocate for the truth, transparency, and empowered living. I'm the creator of the Breakthrough Show Network, and I'm so excited to have you here for this special episode this morning. It's earlier than we usually are. Hopefully, you're up and you've got your coffee, and we're going to have a good conversation together today. If you're tuning in today, you'll likely know that all eyes in the Connecticut homeschool community have been on Hartford the last several months. Yesterday, a working group meeting was held at the Legislative Office Building, a meeting organized by Representative Patrick Biggins of House District 11 to discuss potential regulations on homeschooling in our state. Though the meeting was not widely publicized, the homeschool community showed up anyway, in person, online, and in spirit to ensure that our voices continue to be heard loud and clear. Today, I'm honored to be joined by two powerful women who are no strangers to this work and advocacy. First, Diane Connors, president of the Connecticut Homeschool Network, a longtime leader in support of homeschool freedom here in our state. And second, attorney Deborah Stevenson, founder of National Home Education Legal Defense, a relentless legal advocate for homeschooling families, not just in Connecticut, but across the nation. So if you're joining us live here today, I would love for you to head over to the comments. Let us know that you're here, where you're joining from. And if you have any questions, comments throughout, we would love to take those, and hopefully we'll have time to address some of those throughout the show. We're going to be talking today about what happened in that meeting yesterday, what it means moving forward, and how we as a united community can stay informed, involved, and inspired. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Diane Connors and attorney Deborah Stevenson to the show today. Good morning, Diane and Deborah. I'm so glad to have you with us today for this, what's sure to be an amazing overview for those that couldn't attend yesterday, or maybe even for those that could. Sometimes when we're caught up in the moment, we're in the rush of things and we don't know what happened. So hopefully this will be a great review for everybody. But I would love to take a minute and just welcome you to the show. And maybe we'll start with Diane. I know you've been on the show before. Our people here on the network are getting to know you, but you're a local celebrity in our homeschooling community. Everybody knows you. You want to maybe share something that's bringing you joy this morning before we get into this conversation today?
Okay. It's a beautiful day and it's the last day of the heat wave, so that's an awesome thing. Yeah.
We'll go with that. We're all hot. We're all hot here in southeastern Connecticut right now, for sure. And Deborah, I'm so excited to welcome you to the show for the first time. What is something that's bringing you joy this morning?
I'm very joyful of being with you for the first time.
Glad to have you here.
I hope I can, enlighten a few people about what's going on.
I think it'll be great. I think some of the conversation yesterday that we had after the meeting involved it being a very educational meeting. I was looking at the faces of some of the people in the room, and as you were sharing facts about what the actual law here is in the state of Connecticut, I saw some not necessarily shocked looks, but just that look that people get when they're hearing something for the very first time. And so I think that was so important. I want to give you guys a couple minutes to kind of maybe give it a little overview of what we've been dealing with here in the state of Connecticut where homeschooling is concerned. I will let either one of you take the stage and let us know your thoughts. Just a brief overview.
Okay, I guess I'll go first then. What's been happening in Connecticut is not unusual. Periodically, through the years, we've had the legislature, some in the legislature, attempt to put forth regulation of homeschooling. And each time we rise to the occasion and fight back. This session was no different, although that usually a bill is proposed and you have a public hearing. That didn't happen. They just decided, oh, well, we'll have an informational hearing on homeschooling, and we'll only invite a few people to have their say, and we'll question them. And it won't be really a true back and forth or a public hearing. So that was a bit alarming, and and we were actually the scapegoats after a horrible incident occurred in Waterbury, where a child was years ago was abused and neglected, not a homeschool child. But the legislature periodically does use any horrific incident to scapegoat homeschoolers to try to regulate them. So that's what happened in the last session. The session ended, moved forward. There was a legislator who wanted to continue the conversation only privately, and only inviting a few people to a meeting, a working group meeting, which was happening yesterday. So I think that's pretty much, the gist of it.
Right, right. So, Diane, from your perspective, what has been the I want to say, for anybody that doesn't know, what is the stance of Connecticut Homeschool Network regarding these regulations that they're trying to put in place?
Well, it's no different than our position has ever been. We believe that the laws that already exist need to be enforced. That's the real issue. And knowing that they have everything that they need, we have taken a position of no compromise to any further regulations. And that's a big part of the work that we do, in addition to informing prospective homeschoolers and current homeschoolers that may have questions, what they need to know, and how they can get their questions answered and get the resources that they need so that they're on their way customizing their homeschool experience to what their family needs.
Right,
But
right,
no compromise. It's simply not necessary.
right. So, Deborah, you were talking in the meeting yesterday about the difference between the notice of intent and a letter of withdrawal. And I want to sort of start with maybe um, if you could share what our Connecticut statute, General Statute 10-184 says, and then differentiate between those two things, because I think that that's something that is important. It needs to be repeated 9 million times until people understand. So I want to start with you with that. Tell us about Connecticut General Statute 10-184. What does the law say about homeschooling in the state of Connecticut? And if you could differentiate between those two things, I think that would be helpful for people.
Sure. Connecticut General Statute 10-184 is entitled The Duties of Parents. And it has been, the first sentence of that is the most important part. It says, all parents shall bring up their child in some lawful employment and instruct them or cause them to be instructed in, and then it lists 6 or 7 different subjects, period. Okay. That one sentence has been in existence in our state since the Code of 1650. Actually, the idea that parents have the inherent right and duty to bring up their child to be a functioning adult in society, that has been from time immemorial, a right and an understanding. So it was first codified in 1650. And it really remains virtually in the same manner today. So in Connecticut, then, that means that parents who either have withdrawn from a public school or private school, or who just decide from early on to take on their own responsibility, it is the law that you must educate your children. In fact, that first sentence is what's known as the compulsory education portion of the statute, meaning that all parents shall educate their children. This is a duty, and that's by law. You are responsible for that. If you do not do that, if you're not instructing your own child, then the rest of the statute applies. The second sentence of the statute goes on to say that children between certain ages, parents of those children must have them attend a public school, unless those parents who are giving the child are able to show that the child is being given equivalent instruction elsewhere. So if you're not doing your duty under sentence number 1, and you're not sending the children of those ages to public school under sentence number 2, you must be able to show equivalent instruction elsewhere. Where is elsewhere? Private school. That's how the statute reads. That's how it has been interpreted. And that's what we see as totally functioning and appropriate. The subjects that are listed, we are not required to do them in any particular form, manner, time frame. That's all up to the parents. So we have freedom to educate our child in the manner we see fit for that child, in a method we see fit for that child to meet that child's individual needs.
Mhm.
Now, in 1989-90, there was another effort to regulate homeschooling, to just kind of disregard that and put a whole lot of regulations. You must go to the public school and we tell you what to do, et cetera, et cetera. And at that point, there was a year-long debate about it. And the result of that was that the lawyers for the Department of Education were supposed to come up with a recommendation for regulation. In the end, because we put up such a stink, and that was before the internet, and we had 500 people come up to a public hearing, et cetera, just by word of mouth and a lot of effort, we managed to kill a bill that was proposed to regulate. And that lasted for a number of years. However, what the Department of Ed decided to do at that point was, instead of going through with the regulation they were proposing, they came up with a suggested procedure for home instruction, and they adopted that as their policy, not as a law, just as their own policy. And it was a suggested procedure. So within that suggested procedure, however, the procedure was, you must file a notice of intent, or we can call you truant. Must file a notice of intent, come to a portfolio review with a public school, and if you don't, we can call you truant. None of that was legal. None of that was adopted as a law. This was under the title Suggested Procedure for Home Instruction. So there was much confusion about that. And since that time, that was adopted in 1990. And so when the Department of Ed puts out guidelines or policy, local boards of education say, oh, well, we have to follow that. And they adopt that policy or guidelines as their own policy. And that's fine. But policies, when you have withdrawn from a public school, you are no longer in their jurisdiction. Therefore, their policies do not apply to you. They're unenforceable. Mostly the people in those local boards of education don't understand that, or don't want to, or think they have to apply this to people. And so they kind of tell parents who withdraw, that's fine. Parents will send in a letter of withdrawal, which is totally different. The letter of withdrawal is the parents' notice to the school that they are withdrawing their child as of a certain date. And it's effective as the time that they send in that letter of withdrawal. The notice of intent is a document, a piece of paper that is developed by the local school board on the recommendation of the Department of Ed. And it says just exactly what I described before. You must come, first of all, you must file it. Second of all, you must do the portfolio review, or we can, report you to DCF or whatever. It doesn't exactly say that, but that's what amounts to if you say,
Right.
no, I don't want to. So that's where the confusion lies, and the difference between a notice of intent, which is not law, and the letter of withdrawal that parents must do in order to avoid the issue of truancy. Because if you just keep your child at home without telling the public school, as of a certain date, I'm no longer enrolling my child in that school district, then you become truant if you're still enrolled and keep the child home. So I think that's in a nutshell, what the difference is.
No, I appreciate that. And even this is one of the things I was saying to Diane when she was on the show last month, was about that very first sentence of 10-184, the duties of parents part. I think many of us grew up thinking you have a child and you put them in public school. I was certainly never told that it was my duty as a parent in this state to educate my child, and then if I didn't want to, here are my choices. That was never presented to me in that way. And it's so interesting, being that aren't we required by that statute to learn the laws and the like some of the things that have to do with local government?
Well, that statute doesn't say you have to learn the law, but certainly that is what we all should be doing. But that statute is extremely important because the second sentence is the compulsory attendance portion of the statute, which does not apply. But more important than that is this is intentional, that people are not informed of the first sentence of 10-184. And it was remarkably seen at the informational hearing that we had in May 5th, because the attorneys for State Department of Education, for DCF, and for the OCA, Child Advocate, sat there and were informing the members of the two committees there what the law is on homeschooling. What is the law? Same question. And they did a PowerPoint presentation, and they completely omitted to reference at all the first sentence of 10-184. And that was intentional. And that's what we're up against.
Right. So all of this has happened the last couple of months, and it's been a lot, I think, on a lot of homeschool families, because, we're busy homeschooling our kids. So there's that. And then we have all of our regular, everyday life things going on. And there's been a lot of going up to Hartford and everything else. And so, Diane, what do you feel like has been the overall energy with all of this, with the homeschoolers? How have you been feeling like they have been processing all of this?
I think it's been very emotional, but the emotion is so strong. They're so insulted and indignant over what is happening, because this community has been bullied for decades. Everything that Debbie is talking about is the backdrop, the foundation for what has unfolded toward us by school districts, and the fallout from that, and approaching families that are withdrawing their children with a very strong arm, to the point of making threats, to the point of weaponizing DCF, and having families be investigated because they withdrew their child and didn't file a notice of intent. The family's already done their homework. They stand up for themselves. No, it's not required by law. I'm not doing this, but I am notifying you with the letter of withdrawal. All the information's on there about the child. And it doesn't matter. It gets into a power and control issue and an abuse of authority. So, and it's also very interesting that the whole community has lived this experience, whether it happened directly to them or they read the stories that the families share, where this bullying goes on, and it needs to stop. It just needs to stop. And the concern among the community is, well, is my state is my town a homeschool friendly town? And we can't fully answer that, because the superintendents and the local boards of education, those people change. So even if it's okay at one time, it could change next year or in a few years. So there's this constant edginess. And we've had families that have never enrolled their children get a letter from their local school district naming their children by first name. I mean, is that intimidating or what? And saying, Here's a copy of the notice of intent. You have to file this. And again, these are families that have never enrolled their children. They're homeschooling. They've been homeschooling for years. And there is an attitude of standing up for themselves and saying, no, you will not do this. I'm not going to go along with this. And you're not going to try to set a precedent in my community. You know, we're tired of it. It's been going on for decades. We have, Attorney Stevenson has written letters to superintendents to educate them. I've done the same thing. And it just doesn't stop, and it needs to stop. And I'm going to go ahead and say this because it needs to come out, and it did come out in the meeting yesterday. There are internal problems that are so significant, whether it's cliques in agencies or legislature, wherever it happens to be, and power and control issues that challenge legislators to uphold their oath. They're public servants, but are they? Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, or sometimes they might start off that way and they get stonewalled and then everything gets topsy-turvy. And that's part of what we're concerned about with what's going on right now.
Right. So, in your opinion, what do you feel was the most important takeaway from yesterday's meeting, whether it was stated outright or maybe between the lines? What do you feel was your biggest takeaway from yesterday?
I think the shock of the education that they received, not as much the people in the room, but the legislators. And there were 4 of them, 5 of them. We know our community. We know the laws, we know the policies, and we keep repeating them. And when they were presented yesterday, and when the stories were presented yesterday in a way that we have not been allowed to do, they were shocked. They were shocked. And we will see how it moves forward, because again, the concerns are, if all of them are very well intended and they're using the power of their position to represent this community and our voices, when we already went up there May 5th with record-breaking numbers, over 4,000 people, the Capitol Police told me they stopped counting after that because the lines to get in were so long that people were going around to the Capitol side, entering there. They couldn't keep track. The highways were jammed. It was pretty intense. But when you have a turnout like that, the entire legislature and the government needs to look at, what are these people trying to tell us? What is it that we're not listening to? What is it that we could do better? Where do we need to self-correct instead of allowing this wrongdoing, wherever it's playing itself out, to continue? And some of them want to hear it, and some of them are having temper tantrums against it. So, we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, but we're all paying attention. We're all paying attention.
Right. Deborah, from your expertise and perspective, maybe from the legal perspective, what do you feel like was your biggest takeaway from the meeting yesterday?
I think the most important thing was that we did manage to get through, as I've been saying repeatedly, that the issue of regulating homeschooling at this point has no basis whatsoever to happen at all. As the Waterbury incident, where the child was locked away for 20 years, was used as an excuse to say, oh, we should regulate homeschooling. Then, I pointed out May 5th that this has nothing to do with homeschooling. That child was never homeschooled. The school district, in fact, he was enrolled for 5 years, and for 5 years, the school district watched the child being starved, stealing food in the school, and rummaging through the garbage in the school in order to get something to eat. They reported it to DCF, and DCF and the police went out there twice. And the mother told the child, you better not say anything is wrong or you'll get less food, and, locked away more. And when they came, she told the police, oh yeah, everything's fine here. And that was the investigation that DCF and the police did, is sitting there listening to the perpetrator say nothing is wrong. And they went away. And for the next 20 years, this person was locked away again. So this is clearly an agency issue. They do not follow up. They do not either know the law or want to follow it up or are capable of following it up. And the kids die and nearly die on their watch. So yesterday, I got to say that more, but more importantly, one of the legislators came in and said, why are we here about homeschooling? This has nothing to do with homeschooling. This has to do with the agencies and their failures. Why don't we call each agency head in before this group and demand answers? That was important, and that has not happened before. We don't know how that will look or what's going to happen, but that was emphasized roundly and roundly applauded by those in the room. So that was huge in my opinion.
And you have been doing work of trying to urge these agencies to be transparent and to share information, and have not gotten the kind of response that we've hoped for. Is that correct?
Well, yes. And in 2018, there was another incident with Matthew Tirado, and this was in Hartford, very similar to the Waterbury incident. Mother couldn't handle the child. Child was autistic. Mother had her own issues. And this child was being starved as well. The school district knew about the autism and the problems and transferred the child to a private school at one point. And the mother didn't have him attend that either. He wasn't attending the public school before that. And so then after that, the parent just kept the child home, totally still enrolled in the Hartford Public School District, not homeschooled at all. And then what happened after that was DCF did come and try to, knock on the door and whatnot. The mother wouldn't answer the door. DCF then filed a petition for neglect in the court. The court sent out notices, you have to appear in court. The mother didn't appear in court. And so then the DCF and, whoever was at the court hearing said, well, I don't know, Judge, what to do. We knocked on the door and she didn't answer the door. So, she's not here. Guess we better dismiss the case. And in either 46 or 96, I can't remember which, about a minute, the court then dismissed the case. 2 weeks later, that child died. I tried at that time because we were being blamed again, homeschoolers' fault, chance to regulate us. And I filed FOIA requests for the information for, all of this to make it transparent. What did these agencies do? Why did they do that? This was no investigation, et cetera, et cetera. At that point, I got absolutely nothing from any of the state agencies that we tried to get it from. Fast forward to now, the child advocate and all these agencies again. On May 5th, I hand delivered to the committees the request for freedom of information. I want all the underlying information about what happened in this case and anything to do about homeschooling that any of these people were discussing at that time. To date, I have received not one thing, and that was May 5th. And today is June 25th. So the battle continues to get that information. We will not stop doing that, but that's, and the agencies have an obligation. There are exceptions under the confidentiality rules, et cetera, when there's a fatality or near fatality.
Right. I find it very interesting, the lack of transparency when that tends to be a question that's directed towards homeschoolers. For example, if you have nothing to hide, why are you not in support of at least registration or at least looking into your curriculum or whatever the question may be? So if someone says that, if you have nothing to hide, why not support regulation or something of that nature? What is your response to that? Because I think as I was talking with Diane a little bit yesterday about I don't know anybody personally that is like, let's harm children or doesn't want to keep children safe. And so there's this idea that in order to do that, we need to have all of this regulation in place, or in addition to whatever we already have. So what are your thoughts about that? Why not just register? What is, I'll start with you, Diane.
Oh, okay. First of all, we already have laws in place to cover all these different areas, and they're not utilized. And that's not our fault. That is the failure of the systems that could utilize them but don't. And the other side of it is we live in a society where we're innocent until proven guilty. So to target a single community and hold them to a different standard, assuming that they're guilty and they have to prove their innocence, is incorrect. It's not how this country runs. And furthermore, as I said May 5th, to give the fox the keys to the hen house further makes no sense, because the authority, so to speak, would be transferred to the very government entities that are failing children and are not keeping children safe. The percentage of children that are graduating 12th grade and are not at 12th grade level or are functionally illiterate is staggering. And Connecticut is supposed to have one of the best education systems in the nation, but there was a report that was just released, I think it's within the last week, about the statistics for Connecticut public schools, and they're dismal. So between that and the fact that even though we're ignored, our kids do so well academically, and as the law states, we are to bring them up in a lawful employment, and we do that. They become entrepreneurs. They may want to go to college or learn a technical skill. They find their way. Going into the military is another viable option that some of them pursue. It's all about the attitude. Again, it's in my opinion a form of prejudice, if not a threat to the system, that such a sizable and growing group of people are taking their own power back, and they're saying, this is my family. I'm raising my children to adulthood. What they do at that point is up to them, because they are adults and they can make their way. But that's our job, is to get them there. And more people are not just handing that over to the government schools and watching their children fail or be unable to read or have unresolved bullying. And as unpleasant as it is to say or to hear, to have the adults in the schools at a rate of almost 20% physically and sexually abusing the children, well, they're not safe in public schools. That does not even touch upon peer-to-peer interactions that are harmful, to the point that some children commit suicide because it just doesn't stop. And with the access to apps that they use, and they bully each other on there, and they use Photoshop and make terrible pictures of people that they target, and it just goes on, and it's not healthy. And at least there does seem to be a movement toward moving away from having the devices be so prevalent, but it's a very rough environment. And the ones that are getting it right, not perfect, but getting it right, are the homeschoolers nationwide. Even the ones that are pulling their kids out to move to something like a micro school or a pod, that's a private education, and that's a viable option as well. But it's still a sign of the parents saying, the people in charge of these public school systems are not getting it right, and they're not going to have their kids stay there for 12 and 13 years when they get one childhood and to go through these difficult situations, or even if they're not in trouble, to watch the police coming into their school, or it doesn't even make it into the media so many times, but the kids know and they talk about all of the things that happen just in Connecticut on a daily basis.
Right.
Enough.
Right.
It's enough.
I have a question. I'm going to have a question for Deb. We need to take a super quick break. And when we come back, less than 2 minutes, guys, I want to ask a question. Deb, I'll give you a heads up so you can prepare before. But as we talk about these things trying to be introduced, I'm curious if it actually goes against what our Constitution says and what that looks like from a legal perspective. So we're going to take a super quick break and we'll talk to Deb when we come back.
Breakthroughs are about more than you might think. They're about discovering who you are, digging deep, reaching to the core of your soul. They're about healing yourself, understanding your beliefs, creating a ripple effect. And it's not just those initial moments that matter. It's about using them to bring more joy into our own lives and the lives of others. It's about having fun, letting loose, enjoying every moment life has to offer. It's about finding a safe space. It's about creating connection. Join us each and every day for exclusive programming, special events, and a community to call home. Where we invite you to explore, change the way you look at and live your life, and go beyond the breakthrough. So we ask you, are you ready? We'll see you online at thebreakthroughshow.com.
Welcome back to The Breakthrough Show. We're here with this special broadcast today featuring attorney Deborah Stevenson, founder of the National Home Education Legal Defense, and Diane Connors, president and founder of Connecticut Homeschool Network. I'm Jessica Dugas, and I'm so excited that you're here with us today to continue this conversation as we watch the climate unfold here regarding homeschooling in the state of Connecticut. So before the break, I was asking about a question that's asked often here as we talk about legislation. If we have nothing to hide, why not support regulation? And I was curious before the break from Deborah if they try to put legislation in place, does that actually go against our Constitution?
Well, there's two constitutions, obviously, the federal constitution and the state constitution. The federal constitution has absolutely, it is a document of granting the authority to the federal government in certain specific enumerated ways. In that federal constitution, there is nothing about granting to the federal government the right over parents or children at all, or even education. The way that federal statutes are written is, and the way they get around that is through the spending and taxing clause of the Constitution, because the federal government has that power to tax and spend. So the federal government then will come up with a piece of legislation that says to the states, here states, we're going to give you a whole bunch of money if you do X, Y, and Z. So the states wanting that money will say, okay, I agree to take that money, and I'm going to write it into our state law that this is our state law that mirrors what the federal government wanted. So that's how they get around it. And so, but they're still, by taking the money, it's like a contract. The conditions that go with that money are what then the state writes into its law as applicable to everyone here. That's one way. So now let me just go to the state level. The state constitution is similar. It is a granting of powers and rights to the state government. But our state constitution, again, does not say anything about parents or children per se. Our state constitution does have a provision for a school fund and for Yale to exist, for example. So through the school fund, though, that is for public education. So that's why, and then you have to go to the courts who have interpreted the constitutions, and under the U.S. Supreme Court, the Constitution of the federal government has been interpreted to say that yes, parents have a fundamental right to the upbringing and education of their children. However, the courts have also said states can regulate that. So there's that. And then under the Connecticut Constitution, there has been no interpretation, and I am glad, about 10-184, because it's self-explanatory, that first sentence. It also goes along with that. And back to the U.S. Supreme Court, Supreme Court has also said that the government cannot compel a public education when a parent wants to give a different kind of education. That was in the case Pierce versus Society of Sisters regarding the Amish, okay? So there is precedent on that level, but courts can change their minds at any time. So that's, whatever they're going to do, I don't know. But more importantly, right now, you have to go down to then the statutes, which are supposed to comport with the Constitution, state or federal. So in Connecticut, with this issue, what Diane was referring to and what I said yesterday and have been saying is, all right, the question, well, why not just file a notice of intent? Why not just report or register with nothing to hide? As Diane was indicating, the mere fact of making the government making us file with them so they have a record of us presumes that we are suspicious and at some point we're likely to commit a crime or harm a child. That automatically removes the presumption of innocence on a particular group. Now, you would not do that to any other particular group and say, well, we think you might be a bad person down the road, and so we're going to make you report to us so we can have eyes on you in case you commit a crime. That doesn't happen. Our law in the courts have upheld the presumption of innocence. Now, you get one step further to the statutes in Connecticut, and they say, well, we need to have you report, because how do we know you're out there, right? We don't know you, okay? So that's quite easily their fault, because the statutes, in particular 10-249, 10-250, and 51, solve that problem and have been on the books for years, but they don't even know or enforce them. 10-49 says once a year in January, each local board of education is required by statute to reach out and find all the children who reside in the district and find out where they are being educated. That's the law, and they never do it. Okay? But if they did do that, then 250 and 251 come into play. And those basically have, if a parent is asked to provide the information in January from the Board of Ed, where's your child being educated? The other two laws say the parents must say three things: the name of the child, the age of the child, and where the child is being educated. So we cover that and have been for 30 years, even though they don't care about these laws and they don't enforce them. We know about them and we comply with them, because we have always recommended to parents who withdraw their child from enrollment to do it by a letter of withdrawal that they create that says two sentences. One, my child, name and age, as of X date, a date that I choose, will no longer be enrolled in your school district. Second sentence, my child will be instructed in accordance with Connecticut General Statute 10-184. We say it that way because the statute 10-184 and none of the other statutes in Connecticut mention the word homeschooling. That's a nickname we call the right of parents and the duty of parents that we have always had. So that covers 10-249, 10-250, and 51, even though the school district and the state legislators haven't a clue that that law was in existence, you know, and of course you can find out where they're being educated, and we tell you where they're being educated. They're being educated, sentence number 1, 10-184 at home by the parents.
Right.
So
I know you mentioned that during the meeting yesterday, and that wasn't, I didn't know that it had said that either. I mean, I've been through the beginning part of the statute. There's so many statutes, and I have to give you some credit as an attorney to be able to keep up with all of that and to know all of these things. But I know you've been at this a really long time. Maybe this is something I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but with that part of the statute that talks about how there's the school board is supposed to find out, once a year where the children are and how they're being educated. How would that even look if they were doing that? Because I've never even heard of any school board doing that before. So how would that look if they were to implement that? Do you just mail everybody? Do you go door to door? What would that even entail?
The statute is silent about how. So they can do it in any manner. But you know what? They send out the notice of intent, don't they? Right? So if they send out a letter saying you must file a notice of intent, well, they can send out a letter. And how do they do that? Well, there's other statutes that say when you have a child, when your child is born, you have a birth certificate, and the birth certificate gets filed with the town clerk. And I do know that each school district is in contact with the vital statistics person at the town clerk's office to find out how many children are going to be of a certain age in the community, because they're doing planning for what classes, how many teachers do we need for the upcoming years? What are we going to ask for in our budget? They take those statistics and figure that out. All right. So that information is available to them by the birth certificates. So they can clearly send out a letter to every one of those parents or every resident in the community, or there's any number of ways, because the statute is silent. So it's up to them to do that, however they deem appropriate.
Right. I'm going to go back to Diane in just a moment here, but what do you feel, Deborah, moving forward, that families need to be paying attention to regarding the situation with homeschooling here in Connecticut?
Well, they definitely need to, whether or not there's a proposal to regulate, they need, and we've always said this, they need to let their legislators know who they are, what their interests are, and find out what the legislators' opinions are about homeschooling. They can always invite the legislator to come to a co-op meeting or to, whatever, to get them to know each other. So they're less likely to think they're being hidden in a closet somewhere. That's one thing. And so when anything like this happens, they can call up their legislator and say, oh yeah, I know you. What do you mean they're going to regulate? Somebody wants to regulate you. Well, you're doing fine. So it's better to have that relationship with the legislators. The second thing they can do is watch the legislature when they're in session. So it's easy to do now. Years ago, we had to drive up to Hartford and look at the bill book in person. Now you can just find it online and see what is being proposed, what is not, and keep up to date with that. This is civics for your kid, right? And so everybody should know how to look up the laws too. And that's easy to do. Also online, you can go to the legislative branch and click on Browse Statutes, but they're not always up to date. If you want the most up-to-date statutes, then you can always contact the Connecticut State Law Library, and they're in Hartford, and they have the most up-to-date statutes listed. It's easy to find. You're not always going to have a lawyer with you, so it is important to know how to empower yourself to look up these laws and to read them. And one example is myself. Years ago, I was not an attorney. I was a parent raising my kids, and this started happening about regulation. And people were saying, oh, the law says this and the law says that. And they were saying at the time, well, yes, parents have to, who want to homeschool, have to show equivalent instruction. Well, I just told you, sentence number 1 versus sentence number 2. They took part of sentence number 1, took the second part of the second sentence, and put them together. When I actually looked up the law for myself, I found that out. I said, Why are they telling me that? That's not what the law says. So you need to be empowered. We have said that for years and years and years by simply doing the most boring thing you can is reading the statutes, but it's imperative because you will be duped by these people if you don't know exactly what that statute says. So that's my advice.
We saw that happen. You mentioned it in the when we had the initial meeting where everybody gathered, because how conveniently they left out certain parts of the statutes, and until you all mentioned that, I think they thought they were going to get away with it as well, which is also interesting.
Yes,
So it's important. Yeah.
They left out the entire first sentence of 10-184, the lawyers for these agencies. And that, a lawyer, looking up a statute and saying, oh, I'm just going to ignore that part, no, that was intentional. That was not an accident. And this has been going on for decades. They try to dupe parents into doing what they want you to do. And that is why it's crucial for you to know the statutes yourself so that you can put it in their face and say, you're wrong. This is what it says. And I'm not going to do it because I'm not required to do it, and leave me alone. And you're going to have to do that through, you have your kid for the rest of the, so 18 years at least, one would think, and you're going to have to protect that child from these people who are just plain duping you intentionally.
Right. Well, I definitely recommend making sure you go to the comments, to the description of the video, you guys. There's a link there for Attorney Deborah Stevenson and NHELD, and there's a ton of good information there, as well as on the Connecticut Homeschool Network website, which can also be found in the description of the video. Diane, from your perspective, how important is it that for homeschoolers to continue showing up physically at things like meetings and rallies and events?
It's very important. The feedback that we have gotten consistently has been impacted by their presence. It's definitely noticed. It's rattling some cages, and that's a good thing, because I have to say it again. They need to look at us and wonder why and what do we know that we are so emphatic about this. And we have been for so long. And it's finally starting to really come out and hopefully truly be heard to the point that something is done and that change happens, because it's beyond the homeschool community. It is the people in the state of Connecticut that have become increasingly more aware that the problems that we have as a state are far-reaching, and they need to be addressed, and we need to do better. We need to really do better. And in order to do that, there has to be self-reflection and communication, and not allowing bullying to go on, and cliques to be controlling the narrative, whether it's in the legislature. And we're hearing that from some of the legislators, that they're being persuaded and they need to stand up for the oath that they took, and that is to represent the voice of the people. And when you have over 4,000 people going up there and continuing to go up there, not only to show that they're making a statement, but also to educate their children. It is a civics lesson. Give them voice. Teach our children how to say no, and let them understand what their rights are and what's going on. And that just because there are adults that are in these different positions, whether it's in any area of government, or wherever else, that, they're people. They're people, and everybody can do better. And they need to know that, because they're watching. They're definitely watching. My kids grew up with all of this happening. Every time there was a bill raised or other things that were handled quietly by us going to meetings, My kids grew up knowing that. That was dinner table conversation. And I know that that's happening in this community now. And during public hearings, the children have gotten up and also spoken and have very strongly stated their view and how that's impacting them too, because they're getting the idea that there's somebody looking at their family and at their parents like, well, we have to keep eyes on you. And it's not okay with a lot of the kids. And one little boy told the education committee the last time, mind your own business. He said it point blank. So I think it's really important for the parents to see the immediacy of the threat that's involved for our freedom, as well as using the opportunity to show their kids that the parents are not victims, the children are not victims. We do have a system, and we have people like Debbie and I and many others, over 4,000 people, who are going to say no. And even in the meeting yesterday, we were not happy about the fact that it was going to be a closed door meeting. Nobody was happy about it. And her and I were in the hallway. We hadn't even gone in the room yet. And homeschoolers that were not part of the meeting simply walked into the room. It's a public building. They were quiet about it. They walked in the room, they took their phones out, and they recorded. And I think that is a very empowering thing to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to pose a question to both of you, because there's so much of this, and I know that we're working on planning some more broadcasts for you guys to understand more and to even get to know us as a homeschooling community. I think so much of what you both are saying about showing up and speaking to your legislators, I think the same can be said to just the everyday person. The fact that so many of us are still being asked, but what about socialization? But what about prom? But what about all of these things that our homeschoolers experience? I think it speaks to the fact that this isn't, we're not back in a time where we don't have the ability to connect on a deeper level with each other. And we can take that effort to go, hey, this is what it really looks like. And there's nothing to be afraid of. And you can ask questions, maybe that don't involve, but what about socialization? Maybe not that question, but other questions, guys, would be effective. I think it's important. And I also want to say that about the showing up from a parent's perspective, I understand how difficult that it is when you have parents working, you're trying to put food on the table. You have to go, well, if I take another day off to go back up to Hartford, what if I lose my job? There's all of these questions that go through the minds of us as parents. And we understand that. I understand that as a mom of 6, as a homeschooling mom. And I think that other than, prioritizing for yourself, lean into the community. We have an incredible homeschool community here. And if you need a ride somewhere, if you want to carpool with someone up to Hartford, or maybe you have something to share, I'm certainly always available to share, your stories and things like that. But lean into the community that's there and help each other, because ultimately I feel like if we don't come together on this issue and really lean into this community that we've created, that we're going to end up spiraling down because we're not showing that unity and we're not helping each other out. So I think that that's so important. I want to ask a final question here today. If there is one action step that you'd like every Connecticut homeschool parent watching today to take this week, what would you tell them to do, Deborah?
I would tell them, as boring as it is, to look up 10-184 and start reading anything below that related to education of your child, so you know your rights.
There it is, 10-184. All right. What about you, Diane? What would you tell the homeschool parents in Connecticut to do? What's an action step they can take this week?
I would say, in addition to what Debbie just said, to be informed, stay informed about how this process is unfolding, stay up to date with it, And when these meetings happen in Hartford, there are Representative Biggins said he was thinking 2 in the summer, 2 in the fall. So that's not a lot. I mean, yes, it's an effort, but it's not like it's weekly. So don't burn out. This is not going to go on forever. We are looking at perhaps 4 more meetings. And then next year, maybe they'll raise a bill. Maybe they won't raise a bill, because that has also been discussed. They're looking at the issue, and just stay aware. So if they do raise a bill, you're ready. We already know it's a possibility. Find support, continue to get support. We're doing everything we can to keep everybody updated on our end, and we're transparent so that everybody has the opportunity to know what's going on. We are not giving up. We are not stopping. And there are indications that we are finally being heard. So we'll see where that goes. And keeping in touch with your legislators as well, and reminding them that, they are public servants, and there were over 4,000 of us there for a reason. And we have a lot to share, and they have a lot they need to hear.
Right. Well, I thank you both for being here today and sharing all of this. I think this conversation, as with many that we have here on the Breakthrough Show Network, they're very layered. There's any number of directions and rabbit holes that we can go down about any topic. And I want to encourage all of you that are watching, whether you're live here with us, there's been so many of you here today, and thank you so much for that. Whether you're live with us or on the replay, put any questions that you might have for Attorney Deborah Stevenson or Diane Connors in the comments, and we're going to try our best to get some more broadcasts together to answer those questions for you. We want everybody to feel as informed as possible as we continue to watch this unfold here in the state of Connecticut and really across the nation. There was another comment that came in earlier about, we wish we had a Diane and Deborah here in New Jersey fighting, helping us to protect homeschooling here. So we're watching this across the nation, and I think it's so important to remain informed. So any questions that you have, continue to put them in the comments of these videos, and I will find them, and I will do my best to come back and report with Deborah, Diane, and some other folks as we are able to do that. I try to end each broadcast on an inspiring note, and if you have a moment, I would love for you to share before we go, what does educational freedom mean to you, Attorney Stevenson?
It means empowerment. It means I'm doing my job as a citizen. They work for us, and we need to know what they're doing. And when they're wrong, we need to speak up. And it's just empowerment. Knowledge, freedom is important. You must always be vigilant, as Thomas Jefferson said, to protect your freedom. And I will never give that up.
Love that. And what about you, Diane? What does educational freedom mean to you?
I'm going to answer that on a more personal level from the perspective of families. And the beauty of home education is that freedom, so that how a child learns can be customized to that individual child, their personal interests, their passions. You can have the basics down and be solid in those basics and springboard from those strong basics into any area. And a child could be, as I said earlier, like truly a budding entrepreneur with a passion. A couple of my kids, one of them was so interested in veterinary science that with that backdrop of a strong foundation, she branched off into all manner of animal, what do I call it? I will call it veterinary sciences. She's not a vet, but she did something more creative with all of it, and that's her passion. And then one of my boys was interested in cars and how they function, and he became self-taught in that. And to this day, as a hobby, he's into that. He's an engineer by trade. And the kids have the freedom to do that, and there's no limitation on it, and it needs to stay that way, just as it needs to stay that way for every other child, whether they're special education and they're thriving at home, which we hear so often. I think that is really important, is to protect that and preserve that, which is why I continue to say that 10-184 is pristine, and it needs to be left as it is, because that first portion of the statute that the government who wants control continues to ignore is what empowers the parents and the children, and it needs to stay that way.
Love it. Thank you both for your perspective today, your knowledge, your expertise. We certainly appreciate you being here, and we look forward to further conversations, like I said, to keep all of our families that watch the Breakthrough Show Network and beyond informed about what is going on. I want to extend my deepest thanks today to both of you, not only for showing up, but for consistently showing up for this community. Your voices have been instrumental in helping Connecticut homeschoolers stay informed, empowered, and prepared for whatever comes next. To everyone watching, whether live or on the replay, thank you for caring. Thank you for tuning in, for asking questions, for standing strong in your belief that families, not the state, should be the ones to decide what is best for their children. This moment in time is not the end of a conversation. It's not the end of advocacy. If anything, it's the beginning of a renewed commitment to stay involved, stay alert, and stand together. As always, the Breakthrough Show Network is here to bring you honest, unedited, real-time conversations that matter. If you have any questions or want to connect with us about future broadcasts, you can email me directly at jessica@thebreakthroughshow.com. Let's keep showing up, keep speaking out, and continue to protect the freedom that allows each of us to raise and educate our children in the way that we know is right. I'm Jessica Dugas. Thank you for watching The Breakthrough Show, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.